News. For now, let's invite Arvind Sanger on the show. Arvind, thank you very much for joining in. Well, it's Middle East. Tensions are bubbling there. Brent crude prices are now almost at levels of $72 per barrel. The good news is when we were wrapping up yesterday's market session, we had already crossed 71. So the incremental increase in Brent is not much, but it is a negative and an overhang. And it's 10 days before we know perhaps which way this is going to go, which means the uncertainty stays. How are you reading what's happening there?
I have to say that in the last 24 hours, my views of the risk of war in the Middle East have grown. You know, the Iran-US situation does not seem to be headed in the right direction. There's been a couple of articles in the Wall Street Journal, FT, and others speculating, and I guess obviously being leaked by various sides about what might happen. But I don't believe the talks are going anywhere, and it's going to be very hard for President Trump to climb down when he's assembled this armada. And I think clearly the Iranians are not going to give up their nuclear ambitions that easily. So there's a better than 50% probability that we're going to get some outbreak of tensions. The only question is it like a quick strike and there's no serious retaliation, or does something happen in the Strait of Hormuz? So I think oil markets and equity markets are going to be on tenterhooks while waiting for seeing how this plays out.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think these things have happened, and escalation, etc., has happened into the weekend, right? Mostly over the last one, whenever such stuff has happened. So we've come back on Monday morning and reporting on stuff which happened over Saturday and Sunday. So we'll see if some of that happens. But just a quick word on the tariff thing, which we've all kind of sort of forgotten. The Supreme Court thing, I think it comes up today. We've had a couple of dates, but no ruling yet. What's your sense? You think worth watching still?
Absolutely. I'm not sure why, but the Supreme Court seems to be struggling with coming out with a decision, which means it's not going to be a clean yes or no. They've been kicking the can down the road. This is an urgent issue. It should not be dragging out this long. The expectation still is that there's going to be some kind of splitting the baby. And maybe they rule against the tariffs, but they don't give any refunds for past tariffs collected. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but clearly the expectation of betting markets and most observers is that the Supreme Court is going to rule against the tariffs as they're currently structured, and President Trump will have to recut some other form of tariffs. But let's see. I mean, we're all waiting to see when the Supreme Court decision will come out.
Hi, Arvind. Good morning. Good to see you again. Arvind, what are you making of the tech space here in India? You know, you had EPAM that came out with its numbers yesterday. It didn't look so bad for the past quarter. The problem is that they were guided that in constant currency, this year will be better than the last. And now it appears that may not take place. So clearly it's telling you that AI is proving to be a bit of a challenge. Stock was down 17% overnight. And in the last few days, we've had a lot of negative news on tech. The index itself has corrected close to 15%. On Indian tech names, do you believe that it's coming to that zone where we want to start dipping in? Or do you believe there's too much of uncertainty and there's not going to be much growth? So why should they even get the current multiples? Your take?
Yeah, I mean, I've always believed that I've had a hard time with the multiples unless you're going to have growth. X growth, what are they worth? What is the valuation? So, there are two questions. There's a short-term growth question and there's a long-term terminal value question. And on both those, there's enough question marks that we're not getting excited. I think they may be good for a trade at some point because, as Nandan Nilekani said at the AI Summit, there's going to be an implementation story for the IT service companies. But the question is the implementation story going to carry the hundreds of thousands of people that work in these IT service companies, or is it going to be a smaller subset of them that are going to be doing that work? And what does that mean? And this is a question for all SaaS companies and now for Indian IT service companies. Is the per seat model getting disrupted over time into a more outcome-based model? And yes, there'll be some companies that'll transition very well, but as a group, I think it's going to be challenging.
Yeah. Growth is going to be challenging in that sense. Arvind, do you have a strong view on markets overall? I mean, directionally? Are here in India, of course, I mean, I think we're down about 3.5% for the year. And last year was poor in that sense. On an absolute basis, it's poor. Relative basis, it's poorer still. But overall, directionally, not just India, but I mean, is the global market looking a little heavyish or all okay?
Well, leadership has clearly changed. I think the tech names in general are struggling. Obviously, the software has been the prime example, but even the Mag 7 have had mixed results at best. And you're seeing energy stocks and other parts of the economy, which are a very small part of the index, and I'm talking about the broader global markets, are now starting to be the outperformers. And they're not just outperforming because there's short-term Iran tensions. This outperformance has started several weeks ago. And so I think that it could be an interesting year where the leadership is kind of getting a little more muddled versus a very clean AI trade with the tech stack leading the way. And this is more of a transition year. And where that leaves the Indian market, I think, to the extent that oil prices go up on supply concerns, Indian market is not going to be, is not going to see a lot of outperformance. But if the growth story, which is starting to show signs of revival, then once the oil news settles down and hopefully we get past this Iran tension sooner or later, then the market could start to perform. But India headwinds remain, things like IT, which are not benefiting, and now oil in the short term. So in the short term, I'm not sure that there's much of a momentum that we see in the Indian markets.
Arvind, one quick question. Do you expect a secondary impact of the software pain? So, for example, Blue Owl, which is that alternate asset managers, they were big lenders to software companies. And we know the news flow over the last 48 hours. They have halted redemptions at one of their retail-focused private credit funds. They have rushed towards a $1.4 billion asset sale. And that's because of the exposure Blue Owl has to the software companies, where there you can see the pain and the bludgeoning. Is this an isolated case, or do you think there will be a ripple impact of the weakness in software spilling over to other parts of the financial market?
Well, so let's distinguish what is going on with Blue Owl and what's going on with the software companies in terms of equity markets versus the short-term business. From a business standpoint, most of the software companies have not seen any collapse. In many cases, not even a slowdown in growth. The concern is about the long term. And so I think there's a little bit of an over panicking about the short term. I think the structural problems are more long term, and I'm not sure that they're going to get disrupted that quickly, and everybody's not going to be disrupted. So there's a little bit of a rush for the exits that's causing the Blue Owl type problems, but I don't think it suggests a systemic risk in software or a systemic risk in lending in the short term. So I think maybe some of this is a little bit of a panic without a real business collapse that was underlying that panic in the short term.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Take your point there, Arvind. Good conversation. Thank you very much for joining us, and appreciate your time here as always on CNBC TV 18. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant.